Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third session of Emission Series, Emission 3, Designing and Planning for Circular Cities. Thank you very much for joining us today. Hopefully, we can have an insightful session on work with broader and deeper knowledge to take. Let me introduce myself. My name is Miss Rina from PSUD, and I will be your MC for this event. First of all, I would like to explain our rules for today's session. Participants shall use name-institution as their Zoom ID. Participants shall assign their audio setting into mute mode while the speakers give speech and presentation. Please use raise hand or type the question in the chat box if there is any question to the speaker in the Q&A session. Questions will be discussed by the speakers and moderator in the Q&A session. The attendance link form will be distributed by the organizer in the chat box at the end of the session. E-certificate will be distributed to the participant after the event, at least 2 weeks after the emission 3. To start our session today, let me introduce you further about this event. The Emissions 3, Designing and Planning for Circular Cities, is the final part of emission series of Ramboll and PSUD event collaboration. Ramboll, a global engineering, architecture, and consultancy company, and PSUD, an independent research-based community in the field of urban design, architecture, and planning, are happy that the Indonesian Ikatan Arsitek Indonesia Jawa Barat, or IAI Jabar, and Ikatan Ahli Rancang Kota Indonesia, or IARKI, is fully supporting the event. Emission is a series of talks organized by Ramboll and PSUD, focusing on issues of climate change, technology innovation, and the future of cities. Within the theme of planning resilient and sustainable cities in Indonesia, the series aims to disseminate knowledge from speakers' experiences in planning for future cities and to expand network within the city shapers communities. For our session today, there would be a presentation from our speakers. There would be Mr. Bjorn from Ramboll, Mr. Iwan Kurniawan from Biro Pembangunan dan Lingkungan Hidup DKI Jakarta, Mr. Prasetyo Adi from Pandega Desain Waharima and Green Building Council Indonesia, and Mr. Troll Damasen from Henning Clarkson. And the presentation session will be continued by Q&A session, and our session today will be conducted by our moderator, Ms. Ade Tinamay from PSUD. Ms. Ade Tinamay is the Director of Business and Development at the Center of Urban Design Studies, or PSUD. Ms. Ade graduated from Department of Architecture, Institute of Technology, Bandung, and finished her Master in Urban Design at the same university. She earned her doctoral degree at the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, University of Wisconsin, Madison, USA. Ms. Ade has been joining PSUD since 1997 and currently practicing as a senior urban designer and planner. Her focuses of interest include urban design and development, public space legal planning, as well as urban anthropology and cultural studies. Ms. Ade actively engaged in not only searching on urban development and planning for various Indonesian cities, but also shaping regulatory aspects of them. So, Ms. Ade, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello, everybody. I hope everyone can hear my voice clearly. Is that correct? Okay. Let me start with Bahasa Indonesia first because I would like to invite everybody as attendees to get familiar with the topic in Indonesian, and then after that I will introduce the speakers in English. So can we move to the first slide that I prepare? The first slide, please. Can we move to the first slide? Hello? Okay, sorry, the internet is not that stable. Can we move to the first slide, please? Slide pertama. Udah mulai? Okay, yes, so let me talk in bahasa Indonesia. Rangkaian acara yang sekarang ini adalah hanya salah satu atau terakhir ya dari sejumlah rangkaian acara, dan kita bisa lihat judulnya itu bergerak dari yang pertama itu lebih kepada sustainable mobility, kemudian bergerak kemudian lebih kepada kota, dan sekarang topik yang terakhir itu adalah bagaimana kota yang bisa dikondisikan untuk lebih menjadi kota yang sirkular dengan kesiapan sirkular ekonominya misalnya. Oke, slide kedua. Ya, jadi sebetulnya saya akan memberikan gambaran sedikit kenapa topik ini juga diangkat sebagai topik terakhir dalam emission, karena kita bisa lihat bahwa kota-kota secara umum sudah menghasilkan sejumlah limbah global yang juga memberikan efek pada rumah kaca, dan sementara itu semua sumber daya alam itu biasanya dikonsumsi di wilayah perkotaan. Itu sebabnya kota yang merupakan satu pusat sumber daya, bahan, dan produk yang kemudian dibuang. Kemudian pertanyaannya itu seberapa jauh kita bisa memiliki ide-ide ekonomi sirkular yang bisa menjawab permasalahan ini dan juga memberikan manfaat ekonomi maupun sosial maupun lingkungan. Oke, slide berikutnya. Itu sebabnya teman-teman nanti bisa lihat dari 4 speaker yang akan berbicara itu, kita akan bertanya bagaimana jika kita bisa dan mampu memikirkan kembali ya peran desain ya dalam mendukung kota yang lebih sirkular. Nanti dari speaker pertama hingga speaker keempat akan merupakan rangkaian yang dijelaskan bahkan dari mulai secara konseptual apa itu kota yang sirkular, ekonomi yang sirkular, dan kemudian kita dibawa jalan-jalan untuk melihat sedikit beberapa contoh baik dari luar negeri maupun dalam negeri, misalnya Jakarta dan sebagainya, sedikit menyinggung tentang kesiapan regulasinya, ataupun sedikit menyinggung tentang contoh-contoh kasus yang lebih mikro lagi. Slide berikutnya. Kalau saya boleh memberi pengantar sedikit bagi teman-teman yang belum paham barangkali dari kata-kata circular economy atau nantinya circular city, itu sebetulnya bisa disederhanakan dengan bahwa ide-ide 3R ya yang dulu sudah pernah kita sangat paham, yaitu recycle, reuse, dan reduce, yang didudukkan kembali pada putaran ekonomi dan putaran kota, kehidupan kota. Itu mungkin gambaran paling sederhana. Walaupun nanti tentu pembicara pertama akan jauh lebih membeberkan lebih detail bagaimana how it works gitu within city context dan keterkaitannya pada ekonomi, sosial, dan environment juga. Ya, slide berikutnya. Jadi memang dua kata ini, dua term ini ya, ekonomi sirkular dan kota sirkular akan sama-sama kita bahas di keempat speaker ini. Dan ini nanti juga akan diturunkan baik itu makro maupun di level mikro. Nanti Bapak Ibu juga bisa bagi Bapak Ibu yang memulainya dari buta sama sekali, nanti di ujung speaker yang keempat kita akan mencoba mensimulasikan tentang ide-ide apa yang dari pihak kita sendiri bisa mengusulkan atau ikut berkontribusi tentang ide-ide ekonomi sirkular atau kota sirkular itu sendiri. Oke, slide berikutnya. Ya, ini nanti gambaran yang Bapak Ibu bisa rasakan bahwa nanti zooming dan zoom out-nya dari micro ke mikro dan sebaliknya. Baik, saya akan bergerak. We're moving on to the section that I will introduce the speakers, each of the speakers, starting from the first speakers. I'm gonna read all of the 4 speakers' resume. Regardless that who's going to start first, but the first speakers will be Mr. Bjorn Appelkist. I hope I didn't butcher out the name. Mr. Bjorn worked at Ramboll as the senior chief consultant, global engineer, architecture, and consultancy company with over 17,000 experts who create sustainable solutions for government and companies across the world. He also worked in the waste management sector for more than 20 years. He has a very extensive experience in waste strategy, waste management planning, as well as circular economy. So he's the right person for these events, actually. And he is also the chair of the International Solid Waste Association Scientific Committee and has been the chair of the working group on recycling and waste minimization, as well as led the ISWA task force on resource management. Earlier, he also worked involved in a program manager at the Technical and Environmental Administration in city of Copenhagen. Yeah. So he was part of the government movement. So, and then also development manager at Solid Waste Collection Company in Copenhagen in Denmark, and development engineer at the Waste Management Department of the city of Malmö in Sweden. So welcome, Bjorn. And the second speaker will be Pak Iwan Kurniawan. I've been known him for a long time ago. He's from Biro Pembangunan dan Lingkungan Hidup DKI Jakarta. He served as the head of Bureau for Development and Environment since 2021, the assistant to the secretary in formulating policies and controlling the implementation of tasks in the public works and spatial planning, house environment, forest, green space, and cemeteries. Prior to that, he served as the head of Bureau, Head of Service Division 2 at the Department of Investment and Integrated One-Stop Service from 2015 to 2021. And he graduated with a Bachelor of Engineering, majoring in architecture from Universitas Tarumanegara, and then postgraduated at the University of Indonesia, majoring in civil engineering and transportation. Welcome, Pak Iwan. The third speaker is one of my best friend, Bapak Prasetyo Adi. He's from Pandega Design Waharimap, PDW, and as well as GBCI. He's an architect and urban designer, as well as the founder of the director of the Pandega Design Waharimap, PDW, we call it PDW, actively participate as core founder of Green Building Council Indonesia, GBCI, member of World Building Council Asia Pacific Network, country leader for Council on Tall Building and Urban Habitat, National Committee for Ikatan Arsitektur Indonesia, and member of Planning Institute Australia, and Ikatan Ahli Perencana. He completed the architecture degree in ITB, as well as Master of Urban Development and Design in UNSW in Australia, and received Leadership Environment Development Scholarship from Rockefeller Foundation, Yayasan Pembangunan Berkelanjutan, as well as Australia Leadership Award from Green Building in 2009. He and his office won numerous awards together with EAI as well. There are a lot of lists of what they want, particularly in Pasir TOD Duku Atas, as well as Jakarta International Stadium. So welcome, Pak Prasetyo Adi. So the last speaker, Troels Damadsen. I hope I spell it correctly. So Mr. Damadsen is an associate design director, digital practice at Henning Larsen International Studio, founded in 1959 for architecture, landscape, and urbanism. Mr. Damadsen has worked with focus on sustainability, circularity, experimenting with various aspects of architecture, such as material and digital fabrication. So we are very delighted to have 4 of the speakers. So without further ado, I would like this first speaker to start with the presentation. Mr. Bjorn Appelqvist. Yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to share my screen with you. Sorry, did it wrong again. Like this. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can see my screen. If don't, please scream. I would like to start with, I'll try to bring you through an introduction to what is the circular economy on an overall level and bring you down to some examples of what can be done in cities. What could be some useful interventions to look into when it comes to the circular economy. So I'll try to bring you from the high level of the concepts down to some actions that could be put in place and some reflections on the roles of cities and the roles of us all together, so to speak. But first of all, I think it's important for us all to remember why is we talking about the circular economy, and it all, by the end of the day, boils down to a triple planetary crisis. We are in a planetary crisis consisting of climate change, accelerating climate change. We have more and more pollution in our environment, and we have a loss of biodiversity all around the world. And some of the main causes behind this is, of course, our extensive use of natural resources, as well as our use of fossil energy to extract and use those resources. And therefore, the circular economy as a way of reducing our material footprint and thereby also our energy footprint is also a way for us to address the triple planetary crisis. So it all comes back to why is this important for us all. So if we have a look at the circular economy on an overall level, it is a vision. It's an aspiration toward an economic system where we decouple our use of finite resources from economic activity and where we don't have any waste left. And that is, as I say, it is an aspiration, something to strive towards, but in many ways, something that we know not probably will reach ever in its fullest form. But that's the ultimate goal, and that's what we're striving towards here. There are three main components of a circular economy. The first one is to design out waste and pollution, making sure that we reduce our pollution footprint. And we do that, and then we just have to make sure that everything that we actually produce has to be used at its highest possible value as for long as possible, to make sure that we keep the things we have invested in, materials and energy, in the system in a useful phase for as long as possible. And the third element of a circular economy is to regenerate natural systems. I'll come back to these parts. There is a lot of models. There's really many graphs and pictures trying to illustrate the circular economy. One of the most famous one is the one on the left, the Ellen MacArthur butterfly, that distinguish very much about the biological loop on the left side and the technical loop on the right side. And we have different approaches and to reduce and bring materials back into our systems. So it's about keeping things in those loops and reducing the leakage at the bottom. So that's one way of looking into it. I personally also really like the picture on the right side. That is the resource hill from circular economy, because it puts more emphasis on the value of keeping value in the system. So we see we have a resource hill where we extract, we produce materials, we put more and more energy and materials into it, and added value for us as users. And then we have a users phase in the middle, and when we not are using our products longer, we are wasting them, and they go down the hill again and lose more and more of their value. So the trick here is both to make the use phase as long as possible, and then to try to capture things on the way down as fast as possible at as high level as possible, and thereby also reducing the need of materials and energy to keep them further in the loop. And it's also very important that at least the butterfly model shows, but this is also a more rough model showing that there are many approaches that can be used and have to be used in parallel to work with a circular economy. It's not about one or the other. It's neither. It's not neither nor. It's about having all of them. It's a continuum of multiple approaches that has to be applied during to the situation we are in, and how further down we have gone through the processes. But as you see here, we have the refuse, rethink, and reduce. It is pretty much about designing out waste, making decisions before we start producing something, and make the things we are working with more smart. Then we have use phase, and then on the right side you see all of those kind of recovering operations where we can reuse, we can repair, we can refurbish, we can recycle. At the end of the day, there is also potential for recovering energy from products that can't be reintroduced to the loop as well. So I think this is, for me, it's very important to not being enormously dogmatic when it comes to a circular economy, saying there is something that is good and there's something that is less good. It is a complex field. It's a very hard task. And therefore, it's also very important that we use all the tools and means we have available to do the best out of a situation. One of the things that I think it's very important for us to think about when we are talking about circular economy is the concept of value. As was said in the model, it's about keeping value at as a high level as possible. And therefore, we also always have to consider what is value actually. I have a couple of examples here just for reflection. We have a perfectly well working typewriter on the left. However, the functional value of a typewriter today, even if it's functioning really well, is not that high. There can be there's a material value in the components, of course. There could be a personal value. My father used to write on one of those, and I played with them as kids. So of course there's an affectional value for me, but as a product being used in society, it's not that high. Then we can have things like the golden ring, broken golden ring. If it's our parents or it's something we inherit, of course it has a value for us personally. Is once again as a ring and as an artifact. There's a material value in that gold that we can use to transfer it to something else. But we can also say, for example, at the end of the day, if we don't have anything to eat, we will most probably happily exchange that ring for the carrots on the right. So value is about many things, but it's very much about what are the needs and what are the perspectives we have on different materials and different products. And therefore, it's also very important to consider this when we're talking about what does keeping value in a system mean, and sometimes acknowledge that something that has a huge, has a good material value or could be used as something might, from an economical perspective, no longer has such a high value, and therefore we have to handle them differently. And also very closely connected to this value is functionality and quality. I think this is important to look into as well. And I guess my colleagues that are designers and architects are even more able than me to elaborate on the concepts of functionality and quality. But we also see sometimes in the debate, especially when it comes to technical requirements, quality becomes a word only adhered to like the technical qualities and the specifications of a material. But quality is so much more. It's about reliability that confirms. It's also about how if you find something beautiful, and it's also about what does it do to us and our way of signaling who we are in society. And it's as for the whole sustainability agenda, it's very important for us to acknowledge the needs of people and not trying to restrain the access to fulfilling one's needs, but finding new ways of doing so instead. I'm not saying, well, you can't no longer get something that is beautiful because it's too resource demanding. It's about finding out how can we get things that are beautiful by still being able to do it in a sustainable way. So those concepts are very important to recognize and think about whenever we are talking about circularity and materials as well. And just a very short one on the regenerative aspects of a circular economy. It's basically to work with regeneration of the nature is two things. One is to help nature to thrive and regenerate by the way we are building or interacting with nature. It could be that we to make sure that it's about the return of nature in our societies. It's about building parks and building natural areas or building our buildings and infrastructures in ways that helps nature becoming stronger instead of weaker. It can be by introducing habitats within our cities. It can be, well, for example, if you build a new road, if you along building a new road also improve the habitats and the natural environments around the road, so that you actually get more nature and more biodiversity by the intervention in making nature. That's a way for us to help nature to regenerate. And the second perspective of regeneration, that has also have been the traditional way of us interacting with nature, is of course to returning our organic materials back to soils. It's about making sure that nutrients, food waste, and other materials are going back to the soils as to make sure that we not are depleting our natural environment and the earth and soils we need to grow food and have nature thriving in. So that is the concept. Then the question is always what to do. And I just wanted to bring 4 examples of what I think are very relevant things to look at, and what also could be very relevant to, I think, to look into from both from a global perspective, but also from an Indonesian perspective. First of all, refuse what is about saying what do we don't need, what should we stop doing. This is about to think before we start producing things. So it's about choose not to produce, sell, use products that we don't need and aren't sustainable. This is very personal. It is a personal as well as societal choice to do here. I can give you some examples, but on a micro scale, that I think is worth considering. I can never in my life understand why we need to have electronics and things blinking in our shoes. That is for me a total waste and a total loss of valuable resources on something that we don't know. You can still walk in very nice shoes without having electronics in them. But I will promise you, if you're looking at kids' shoes at the moment, it's really, really hard to find. Sometimes really, really hard to find someone that is not blinking and not having all of those gadgets in there. Another one is, of course, things like, do any healthy grown-up really need a straw to drink from? So those kind of examples are very evident, but we can think it into everything we do and see, well, is this really needed? Is this something we can do differently? The second one is looking into multiple use and reuse, to start to keep on choosing reusable products over single-use products when we are looking at how to work with this. It's about promoting take-back schemes, deposit schemes, and then of course also reusable products have an end of life, and when we have to recover them. Going from plastic, single-use plates, single-use cutlery, to reusable products is one way where we know there is really lot of materials in circulation that could be reduced, and we can reduce our material footprint in that way. It's also about single plastic bags. We don't need shopping bags that are. We don't need all of those plastics everywhere. We can do much better there as well. There's a lot of initiatives going on, of course, already, but there's still a long way to go. We can also think of it in a broader phase. I guess most of us have sometime bought clothes that are used just a couple of times and a few times. If we bring those materials back in again and think about can we get them for us secondhand clothes? Can they be reused, or can we sometimes even consider more renting things like clothes for special occasions, clothes for small kids, and then making the material have a longer life and a longer useful life. Third sector that I think is very important is our food chains, where we can look at reducing our footprint here, both when it comes to production and distribution. It's also about minimizing waste when we prepare food. Excuse me. as well as when we consume. This is also a cultural thing, of course. We don't. It's quite embarrassing not to have enough food when we are inviting people for a dinner. But on the other hand, it's also very embarrassing for us in the long run to destroy our planet. So we have to work with how we balance things here and make things just right. And then, as I mentioned in the regenerative slide as well, it's also, when it comes to food, about recovering the nutrients, the carbon matter, and the proteins in our food waste, making sure that they come back to new use and are brought back to soils to improve our quality of soils and making sure that we can produce food also in the future in a sustainable way. Food also, of course, has a priority due to the fact that food that are decomposing in dump sites and at landfills produce methane, will also are contributing heavily to climate change around us. And the last one, that is also what I'll know my colleagues and my fellow presenters are going to talk more about, is the buildings and infrastructure. I think it's important that we design and build infrastructure and buildings to last for multiple use, so we get the most out of the resources we put into them, and for repurposing, so that we don't have to tear a building down when we don't use it for the purpose it was built for, but can change it and still keep the structures as much as possible and redirect them for other purposes. We should use reused products and recycled materials when we build. We should support the natural regeneration. And as well, I think, and this is very important, buildings and infrastructure is not only about the buildings and infrastructure, it's also about supporting the more circular way of life. Our cities, everything we say here, if we're going from single use to multiple use, if we're going for more environmental friendly distribution chains, calls for changes in the way we transport materials, for the way we interact with each other, and the way we connect in cities. And that's also very important when it comes to planning, to make sure that that is forwarded into the systems. And last but not least, it's of course about recover and reuse materials at the end of life of a building as well. Apologies here. So then we also could have a look at what are the role of municipalities and cities in a broader sense when it comes to supporting the circular economy. Cities can in many ways be a promoter of knowledge instruments that are needed. It's about giving common understanding of what do we mean by circular, to direct energy and resources in the right way. It's about spreading knowledge. It's about gaining data that can be used. It's about, and this is very much a role for the public sector, to be the independent connector between different actors in the city, and also making sure that cities themselves are learning organizations that brings the concepts to them.
Sorry, 2 minutes left.
Yes, thank you. Circular cities can also promote and create demand for more circular models through public procurement. And cities can, on the local level, work on legislation, can set an agenda and make sure that we have administrative standards in place. And a city can also, if it's proven successful, also be a promoter of change of national legislation by showing by cases and showing what can be done. And what I also think is really, really important here is the spatial planning and making sure that we think about the structure of our cities and building and planning for circular principles, and make sure that there are space for circularities in the cities. Definitely very important. And last but not least, of course, business support, looking at new financing models and in-kind support for upstarts is also important here. Right, I'm going to go quickly forward and just bring a last message that I think is important in here, and that is, despite that I think we should strive as much as possible to go forward, becoming more and more circular, we also have to acknowledge that there will always be waste. The natural law says that there will be loss of functionality and material deterioration over time. There are things that no longer will be in demand. We will have materials that are hazardous, or we don't longer want to have in our loops, that has to be phased out, and there will be leakage. So therefore I think it's also very important that we work in parallel with promoting a circular economy, but at the same time make sure that we, through integrated sustainable solid waste management, also make sure that we take care of all the leakage that comes out from the systems to protect our environment and mitigating climate change as well. And yeah, even also for Indonesia, we know there are going to be more people, at least in the short run. So there will also be larger demand for materials and a larger waste generation over time. So we'll have to keep in mind that we'll have work on both ends of the rope here, so to speak, both more circularity and more sustainable waste management. And we all have a role to play along the value chains. There might be different approaches that are more important for some of us, whether we see ourselves as consumers, whether we are manufacturers or designers, retailers and sellers of products, or waste managers, but we all have an important role to play within the system. And it's all up to us. By the end of the day, there's only two universal causes for things not happening. One is that we don't know what we have to do. The other one is that we don't want to do it. So together, we are the ones that can bring this forward all together. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bjorn Appelfix. Yeah, this is a very interesting starting point, particularly the slides that you mentioned. There are 2 slides, and then the last one even more important, not the last one, like 3 or 4 last one. There are 5 boxes that you introduced to us: knowledge instrument, circular public procurement, legislation, spatial planning, and business support. I think this is a very much a good transition to move on to the second speaker, Pak Iwan Kurniawan, because as we know, he has a background as a government employee who provide particularly for the legislation aspect as well as the spatial planning aspect. So now we're moving on to Pak Iwan. Selamat sore Pak Iwan.
Sore Mbak Ade, apa kabarnya? Udah lama
Baik.
tidak ketemu nih.
Betul Pak, ketemu lagi sekarang. Jadi kepada teman-teman, kita akan beralih ke speaker kedua. Moga-moga tadi pengakhiran dari speaker pertama memberi jembatan pada materi yang akan disampaikan oleh Pak Iwan. Pada Pak Iwan, saya persilakan Pak.
Ya, terima kasih Mbak Ade. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang terhormat para pembicara pada emission pada sore hari ini, kemudian kepada semua partisipan dan juga kepada pihak IAI Jakarta, kemudian IARKI, Ramboll dan PSUD yang sudah memfasilitasi acara emission pada hari ini. Baik, saya akan mengambil topik Jakarta Now, Jakarta Later, Jakarta as the Circular Cities. Kita ketahui bahwa kota itu sebagai konsumen energi dan material terbesar, tetapi pada saat yang sama, kota juga merupakan tempat yang memberikan kesempatan untuk bagi semua pihak, stakeholder, untuk mengelola sumber daya dengan lebih baik dan efisien. kota juga sebagai tempat lahirnya inovasi, transformasi sosial ekonomi, sebagai potensi besar untuk memimpin transisi menuju ekonomi sirkular. Sebagai respon terhadap kondisi tersebut, saat ini Indonesia sudah berkomitmen ya dalam hal pengurangan emisi sebagaimana tertuang dalam Undang-Undang Nomor 16 Tahun 2016 tentang pengesahan Paris Agreement to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Pada tahun 2015, pemerintah Indonesia telah menetapkan pengurangan emisi pada tahun 2020 sampai dengan 2030 sebesar 29% unkondisional sampai dengan 41% kondisional dibandingkan skenario business as usual di tahun 2030. Target ini merupakan revisi dari target sebelumnya pada tahun 2010 yaitu sebesar 26%. Seperti yang kita sudah ketahui, saat ini kota-kota di dunia termasuk kota Indonesia juga menghadapi tantangan adalah munculnya varian COVID-19 dan ancaman resesi ya tahun depan. Ya, mudah-mudahan ini tidak terjadi. Hal ini pun juga menjadi pendorong untuk dapat menciptakan inovasi baik dalam hal perbaikan lingkungan maupun dalam penciptaan ekonomi baru yang ramah lingkungan. Nah, selanjutnya bagaimana dengan Jakarta? Ya, Jakarta merupakan provinsi terpadat dengan lebih dari 10 juta penduduk dan mendukung lebih kurang 20 juta penduduk Bodetabek, Bogor, Depok, Tangerang, Bekasi, dan Jakarta saat ini memiliki kontribusi terhadap PDB nasional sebesar 17%. Dan 25% kontribusi Jabodetabek terhadap PDB nasional. Saat ini Jakarta memiliki pertumbuhan ekonomi 5-6% sebelum COVID-19 dan merupakan penyumbang terbesar penerimaan pajak nasional yaitu 60-70%. Jakarta merupakan kota yang sangat sibuk, ya, dapat dilihat dari jumlah trips sekitar 100 juta trip per hari. Kemudian juga ada permasalahan lain yang menjadi permasalahan kita semuanya adalah timbulan sampah yang mencapai lebih dari 7.000 ton per hari, yang 60% itu dihasilkan dari kegiatan rumah tangga atau skala permukiman. Hal ini tentunya menjadikan Jakarta kota yang sangat dinamis, ya, yang memiliki peran penting dalam perekonomian yang juga menghasilkan banyak masalah lingkungan yang harus diselesaikan. Jakarta melakukan upaya perbaikan yang inovatif. Pada saat yang bersamaan terdapat tantangan baru. Ibu kota Nusantara pindah dari Jakarta ke Nusantara di Kalimantan. Untuk itu, ya, Jakarta akan fokus menjadi kota pusat bisnis global yang berketahanan. Sebagaimana topik pada hari ini yaitu Design and Planning for Circular Cities, maka perlu pemahaman mengenai konsep circular city dan indikator apa yang dapat dipakai untuk menilai di mana pengertian circular city dalam Circular Cities Declaration adalah sebagai a circular city is one that promotes the transition from a linear to a circular economy is an integrated way across all its function in collaboration with citizen, business, and the research community to improve human well-being, reduce emission, protect and enhance biodiversity, and promote social justice in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. Hal yang menjadi highlight adalah pentingnya kolaborasi untuk perbaikan kesejahteraan masyarakat dan lingkungan. Dalam artikel yang ditulis oleh Pauli F. Perlon dan Spadaro pada tahun 2022 yang berjudul Indicator for the Circular City, a Review and a Proposal, disampaikan 3 kelompok dimensi indikator Dalam hal ini Pemprov DKI Jakarta telah melakukan berbagai upaya pada 3 kelompok dimensi tersebut. Secara garis besar dapat disampaikan sebagai berikut. Pertama adalah environmental dimension, adalah bagaimana DKI Jakarta berkomitmen dalam hal penurunan emisi gas rumah kaca. Kedua adalah economic and financial dimension, di mana proyek pembangunan sebagai roadmap menuju net zero dan green investment ini diwujudkan dan dilaksanakan di berbagai sektor. Kemudian juga ketiga, social culture dimension, bagaimana Pemprov DKI Jakarta menciptakan lapangan kerja baru dan kolaborasi di bidang persampahan dan pemanfaatan ruang ketiga. Jakarta merupakan provinsi pertama yang memiliki rencana pembangunan rendah karbon dan provinsi pertama juga yang memiliki rencana aksi, adaptasi, dan mitigasi dalam satu dokumen. Berdasarkan Government Regulasi nomor 90 tahun 2021. Dalam hal ini Jakarta berkomitmen ya dalam pencapaian target penurunan emisi 30% dan target ambisius 50% di tahun 2030. Di tahun 2030 serta net zero emisi pada tahun 2050. Beberapa kebijakan terkait dengan pencapaian penurunan emisi gas rumah kaca dan pengurangan sampah adalah sebagai berikut, ya, ada beberapa regulasi yang diterbitkan oleh pemerintah DKI Jakarta dengan peraturan gubernurnya, ya, yang terkait dengan pencapaian target-target tersebut. Selanjutnya ini adalah beberapa contoh ya upaya transformasi pada sekolah bangunan prasarana pendidikan yang sudah dilaksanakan di sekolah sebagai sekolah net zero Jakarta. Mungkin ini adalah sebagai pertama di Indonesia ya, sekolah khususnya sekolah-sekolah negeri ya yang kita coba atau Pemprov DKI Jakarta terapkan, yang mengusung konsep rendah emisi. Terdapat 4 gedung sekolah negeri net zero di Jakarta pada tahun 2022 yang telah diresmikan dan juga sudah dimanfaatkan. Pertama adalah SDN Ragunan 08, SDN Duren Sawit 14, SDN Grogol Selatan 09, dan SMA 96 Jakarta. Tentunya hal itu pun juga menjadi studi bagi rekan-rekan sekalian yang ingin berkunjung untuk melihat bagaimana transisi perencanaan dan pemanfaatan dari bangunan pendidikan tersebut. Konsep net zero ya ini adalah bagaimana seluruh kebutuhan energi bangunan itu berasal dari sumber energi terbarukan sehingga meminimalisir emisi karbon yang dihasilkan ya, hingga mencapai batas nol. Selanjutnya terhadap pemenuhan konsep green building dan net zero ya dibuktikan dengan telah diperolehnya sertifikat NZH dari Green Building Council Indonesia. Selain itu juga kontribusi dalam penurunan emisi di Jakarta dapat diperoleh pada bangunan-bangunan tersebut. Sekolah net zero juga menginspirasi pelajar yang bertanggung jawab pada lingkungan ya, sehingga tidak hanya bagaimana kita mencapai menyediakan secara fisik, tetapi bagaimana edukasi ya kepada murid-murid atau para pelajar untuk juga bisa menjadi duta-duta bagi lingkungannya. Pada tahun 2020 ya Jakarta telah berhasil mengurangi 26% emisi gas rumah kaca. Saat ini Jakarta juga telah melakukan beberapa investasi hijau dan pengenaan pajak yang mendukung untuk perbaikan lingkungan. Saya ingin menjelaskan tentang kegiatan ekonomi sirkular dan landfill mining di tempat pembuangan akhir TPA Bantar Gebang yang beberapa waktu yang lalu sudah diresmikan penggunaannya dan juga sudah dimanfaatkan untuk dapat menghasilkan satu pengelolaan hasil yang dapat bermanfaat bagi lingkungan. Tahun ini kami membangun landfill manning di TPA Bangka Gebang dengan kapasitas sekitar 2.000 ton per hari, dan hasil dari landfill manning tersebut adalah refuse derived fuel atau RDF. Dengan saat ini Pemprov DKI Jakarta bersama DLH ya telah berkolaborasi dengan industri semen, SBI dan Indosemen serta Unilever dalam memanfaatkan RDF hasil pengolahan sampah lama di TPST Bantar Gebang sejak tahun 2019. Kolaborasi ini akan dilanjutkan untuk memanfaatkan RDF dari fasilitas landfill mining dan RDF plant sebanyak 700 ton per hari untuk jangka panjang mulai tahun 2023 tahun depan. Harga RDF sangat kompetitif ya, dapat berkisar sekitar 300.000 ton per hari yang dapat dihasilkan. Instrumen pajak yang diterapkan ini kita harapkan adanya diskon pajak reklame sebesar 20% bagi pelaku usaha pertokoan, ya, swalayan hingga pasar rakyat yang menggunakan kantong belanja ramah lingkungan. Ini pun juga sebagaimana sudah banyak ya kita jumpai di pusat-pusat perdagangan dan perbelanjaan di mana mereka tidak menggunakan kantong plastik yang memang sangat anti lingkungan tetapi sudah ramah lingkungan. Kemudian juga bagaimana pembebasan biaya pajak baik nama kendaraan bermotor, BNPB untuk kendaraan listrik pun ini juga menjadi hal yang instrumen pajak yang di Pemprov berikan. Dalam penciptaan lapangan kerja, Pemprov DKI Jakarta telah berkolaborasi dengan masyarakat dan dunia usaha, khususnya dalam penanganan sampah. Saat ini terdapat 3.118 bank sampah dan 8.511 ton per tahun reduksi sampah yang dapat dihasilkan atau dapat dicapai. Pemprov DKI Jakarta juga dalam hal ini melibatkan startup aplikasi pengelolaan sampah untuk digitalisasi bank sampah, antara lain Jack1 R3, Duitin, Circulus Refill, Ecosystem, dan lain-lain. Selain itu juga bank sampah juga dikembangkan biokonversi BSF dan Maggot yang ini sudah banyak dikelola oleh masyarakat dan juga sangat dibutuhkan untuk masyarakat dalam hal budidaya pangan dan sebagainya bagi peternakan. Nah, kemudian juga terdapat 362 rumah Maggot yang sudah terbangun di tahun 2021 dan sebesar 836 ton per tahun reduksi sampah organik ya yang dapat dicapai atau dihasilkan ya pada tahun 2021 melalui platform KSB persampahan.com ya juga telah tercipta sebanyak 17 kolaborator dan 118 penerima bantuan. Ya tentunya hal ini ya akan terus dikembangkan ya di tingkat RT, RW, Dasawisma dan sebagainya untuk terus mengupayakan adanya pemilahan sampah dan juga bagaimana mengembangkan ya upaya-upaya reduksi sampah itu mulai dari kawasan perumahan maupun juga rumah tangga. Lalu secara khusus bagaimana peran desain ya in scale needed for real change ya. Perlu adanya satu perubahan paradigma ya di mana new landscape dari untuk solusi ini mengutip dari paparan yang disampaikan Ibu Astrid ya ini di dalam design with purpose. Aksi desain kota sejatinya memiliki skala tujuan dan metode pencapaian yang lebih berdampak untuk menjadi katalis solusi yang lebih nyata dan lebih implementatif ya di dalam perkotaan itu sendiri. Ini merupakan beberapa contoh yang sudah dikembangkan ya oleh Pemprov DKI Jakarta dengan PDPAL ya di mana selama ini kita melihat fungsi-fungsi perkotaan ya sebagai pendukung kegiatan perkotaan dalam hal ini IPAL Krukut ya IPAL ya izin pengolahan air limbah itu hanya bersifat fungsional ya tetapi kita akan mengembangkan tidak hanya sebagai fungsional, tetapi juga bagaimana ini ada ruang edukasi sebagai ruang ketiga. Bagaimana fungsi-fungsi yang saat ini mungkin tidak menjadi fokus ya di dalam hal penciptaan ruang-ruang ketiga, ruang-ruang edukasi. Kita akan Pemprov sudah banyak ruang-ruang yang sifatnya fungsional untuk pendukung perkotaan. Kita adaptasikan sebagai ruang-ruang ketiga, kemudian juga ruang-ruang diskusi, ruang-ruang edukasi yang masyarakat bisa mengetahui bagaimana pemerintah melalui BUMD-nya, PD Pal Jaya itu mengolah air-air buangan yang berdasarkan hasil aktivitas perkotaan yang saat ini cukup besar jumlahnya harus diselesaikan. Kemudian ini pun juga tempat ekopark yang yang sangat antusias ya dikunjungi oleh masyarakat. Ini mempunyai peran yang sangat tidak hanya untuk edukasi rekreasi, tetapi bagaimana ada fungsi lain yang juga dihasilkan untuk sebagai area pengendalian banjir ya, untuk sebagai pengembangan ruang integrasi antara ruang terbuka hijau kemudian juga dengan ruang terbuka biru. Dengan konsep naturalisasi tentunya memang tidak bisa diterapkan atas semua segmen sungai atau saluran PHB ya, tapi bagaimana ruang-ruang ini kita coba kolaborasikan antara pencapaian untuk menambah ruang terbuka hijau dan juga pengendalian banjir yang dapat diupayakan lebih optimal ya, memanfaatkan area-area tersebut. Mungkin ada beberapa video yang bisa ditampilkan ya terkait dengan before after tempat ekopark, tentunya akan sangat menarik nanti bisa dilihat. Nah, ini pun juga demikian ya terkait dengan fungsi-fungsi lain yang saat ini ya, hanya sebagai bagian dari integrasi antar moda ya, misalnya JPO yang akan menghubungkan dengan halte sebagai Transjakarta, kemudian juga dengan area bangunan yang lain. Ini ada satu pembangunan yang tidak hanya menyiapkan interconnecting bagi moda untuk transit, tetapi bagaimana menciptakan ruang-ruang ketiga juga yang juga dapat dimanfaatkan oleh masyarakat ya, sebagai ruang-ruang yang sangat menarik ya untuk sebagai menikmati ruang kota itu sendiri. Dari tengah kota, ya, median jalan yang saat ini tentunya tidak semua masyarakat mempunyai kesempatan ya.
Maaf, 3 menit lagi ya Pak.
Menikmati ruang kota itu sendiri seperti itu. Kemudian Jakarta International Stadium pun juga ini sudah mendapatkan grade platinum ya, tentunya mensupport kepada pengurangan gas rumah kaca itu sendiri. Kemudian ada aktivasi lain yang memang dikembangkan pada kota untuk ruang-ruang ketiga, pelebaran trotoar, pelebaran pedestrian, merupakan ini satu upaya ya ketika Pemprov mengintensifkan pengembangan transportasi, perlu adanya ruang-ruang yang menumbuhkan juga aktivitas-aktivitas untuk mereka mau bergerak menuju satu titik transit menggunakan ruang-ruang yang lebih nyaman dan lebih memberikan kejelasan kepada fungsi-fungsi ruang tersebut menjadi lebih menarik. Kemudian juga beberapa public square dan culture spot yang ini pun juga kemarin sempat viral ya di kawasan Duku Atas dan juga ada di beberapa area spot-spot yang lain. Tentunya ini yang terus dibangun ya oleh Pemprov Jakarta sebagai ruang-ruang komunikasi, ruang-ruang interaktif, ruang-ruang ketiga untuk memfasilitasi aktivitas masyarakat yang tentunya tidak hanya internal Pemprov tetapi sudah menambah kepada masyarakat dari Jabodetabek, sekitar Jakarta, bahkan ada yang juga dari lebih jauh dari Jakarta untuk menuju atau menikmati ruang-ruang ketiga tersebut. Ini sudah banyak taman maju bersama yang juga kita kembangkan bersama Dinas Pertamanan dan Hutan Kota. Ini merupakan revitalisasi dari taman-taman yang sudah dibangun sebelumnya menjadi taman-taman yang lebih mendengarkan ya masukan-masukan dari masyarakat, bagaimana kebutuhan apa saja mulai dari planning, perencanaan, kemudian juga sarana-prasarana yang akan dibangun di sana. Ini merupakan satu kolaborasi perencanaan yang melibatkan masyarakat untuk hadir sehingga mereka pun juga ada rasa untuk memiliki ya ruang-ruang taman-taman tersebut untuk menjaga dan juga sehingga taman-taman tersebut akan lebih sustainable ya, lebih hidup ya, dan lebih menarik. Nah, kita juga ada beberapa perubahan yang sebelumnya sifatnya garden menjadi park ya, sehingga garden itu tidak ya selama ini hanya sifatnya pasif ya, tapi akan menjadi park ketika akan ada sebagai fungsi-fungsi interaktif di dalamnya. Sebagai akhir, mari kita kolaborasi ya dalam menjaga ruang Jakarta. Kita sudah menerapkan ya tadi gerakan sadar sampah yang kita launching, kita kampanyekan pada acara Car Free Day ya, untuk semuanya juga terlibat ya di dalam menjaga ruang kota ini yang sudah diberikan kepada publik. Bagaimana publik tersebut pun juga menjaga ruang publik tersebut menjadi ruang yang lebih bersih, ruang yang lebih nyaman bagi semua yang akan memanfaatkan ruang tersebut. Demikian yang dapat saya sampaikan. Terima kasih ya Mbak Ade. Saya kira pesan-pesan yang tadi dapat disampaikan ini pun juga menjadi satu generator atau satu pancingan ya untuk dapat mendapatkan masukan dan juga dapat diterapkan tidak hanya di Jakarta tapi kota-kota lain yang menuju satu pencapaian hal yang sama. Demikian, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Pak Iwan. Thank you so much Pak Iwan. This is very interesting presentation, particularly because you asked us to let's collaborate together. So this is not only from the citizen, but also from the business stakeholders and as well as the research community. So this is pretty much the thing that we want to hear from the third speakers. He will be presenting as part of the research community, Green Building Council, for example, as well as from architecture profession, for example, or urban designer profession. So let's move on to the third speaker, Pak Prasetyo Adi. Sudah ada di tempat. Selamat datang. Silahkan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Ade. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Please allow me to share the screen and I'll speak in bahasa Indonesia. Selamat siang rekan-rekan, selamat sore rekan-rekan sekalian. Saya pada kesempatan ini saya akan membawakan materi yang antara lain dari praktek kami, juga dari pekerjaan dari Green Building Council Indonesia juga sebagai organisasi yang bergerak di bidang industri konstruksi dan bangunan gedung. Jadi kalau kita lihat kita sekarang ini kita hanya punya satu planet bumi, belum diketemukan lagi ada planet bumi yang lain yang kita harus sama-sama jaga. Dan kita lihat bahwa perubahan iklim banyak terjadi karena manusia. Kalau kita lihat di tabel ini ya, jadi kita bisa lihat bahwa perubahan iklim karena alam cenderung konstan. Kemudian kita lihat yang garis merah itu adalah total antara manusia dan alam gitu ya. Dan kalau kita lihat dengan skala waktu yang lebih jauh lagi, ternyata di atmosfer kita sekarang CO2 konsentrasi CO2 dalam titik tertinggi gitu, dari tentunya skala yang beda dari sini skalanya ribuan tahun, dari sini puluhan ribu tahun, tapi kita bisa lihat bahwa kita terus naik dengan event-event yang ada di dalam grafik ini gitu. Kemudian dari World Economic Forum, ini saya nggak akan bacakan, bisa dibaca bahwa apa itu circular economy adalah satu sistem industri yang restoratif atau regeneratif by intention and design. Jadi nggak terjadi sekonyong-konyong, tapi harus direncanakan, harus dirancang. World GBC sendiri yang merupakan satu organisasi yang bergerak di bidang jasa konstruksi, bangunan gedung gitu ya, yang tujuan utamanya adalah transformasi sebenarnya, transformasi industri. Kita sudah mencanangkan tiga hal. Satu, climate action yang dari awal tentang dekarbonisasi, kemudian health and well-being. Ini jauh sebelum terjadi pandemi, kami sudah mengkampanyekan ini, gitu ya, dari regional networks, dari seluruh dunia, gitu ya, yang lingkungan binaan, built environment yang adil, tangguh, dan dari gedung sampai ke kota, dan kemudian tentang sumber daya dan circularity. Apa itu? Bahwa sekarang kita punya disebut programnya ya, North Star Goal, yang addressing 3 dari 17 SDG yang kita bisa baca di sini. Bagaimana sebenarnya dengan program ini kita punya target Green Building Council World GBC dengan circularity accelerator, dengan program circularity accelerator, jadi mempercepat gitu. Bagaimana di 2030 kita dengan pengelolaan yang betul, dengan menggunakan sumber daya secara efisien, mentargetkan zero waste landfill gitu ya, dan bagaimana dimulai dari industri kita, dan di tahun 2050 semua harus sudah dalam satu sistem sirkular yang lengkap, yang penuh gitu. Jadi untuk bangunan gedung, bagaimana mengoptimasi sumber daya itu dan mengurangi sampahnya dari nggak hanya operasional, tapi the whole life cycle, seumur bangunan tersebut, dari ide sampai bangunan selama bangunan tersebut beroperasi, sampai bangunan tersebut juga didaur ulang. Jadi kalau kita sekarang daur ulang material, yang kita lihat nanti gedung akan digunakan lagi gitu ya. Dan bagaimana supaya tahan, kemudian efisien, ruang yang efisien gitu. Selama ini kan ruang apabila selesai bisa berganti fungsi, bisa adaptive reuse, segala macam. Dan kita harus menghitung juga tentang LCA, life cycle assessment-nya, dan termasuk accounting-nya gitu ya. Dan yang selama ini di Green Building Council kita bicara tentang operational carbon, pengurangan efisiensi secara operasional, kita juga harus mempertimbangkan bagaimana net zero di embodied carbon. Embodied carbon adalah nilai emisi CO2 yang dikeluarkan untuk membuat satu bangunan misalnya. Dari material, biasanya dari material, structural material salah satunya. Setelah kita menggunakan low embodied carbon material tadi, bagaimana kemudian operasionalnya net zero, dan tentunya kalau kita membuat sesuatu, mengubah di lingkungan binaan, tetap ada karbon yang dihasilkan, ke depannya kita bisa offsetting. Jadi secara total, secara prinsip, baik embodied maupun operational carbon, seluruhnya net zero. Bagaimana untuk di Indonesia, Green Building Council mengeluarkan program bagaimana sebenarnya kita sekarang dalam tahap pertama ini masih sangat-sangat awal, dan ini kampanyenya juga besar-besaran gitu ya. Target masih jauh, kalau boleh dibilang masih jauh. Indonesia punya target 2060, kita baru sampai first step, langkah awal gitu. Kemudian setelah kita mengurangi konsumsi energi, bagaimana berkembang gitu, improve energy efficiency. Sebagian dari kita udah mulai menggunakan renewable energy. Tadi Pak Iwan sudah menyampaikan Jakarta International Stadium, di atas atapnya juga udah pasang solar panel sampai dengan 5% dari kapasitas listrik terpasang, yang oleh PLN sebenarnya di cap gitu. Jadi ini masih ada perang gitu, masih ada perjuangan lah, bukan perang lah. Kalau perang mungkin agak keras. Perjuangan di mana kita sebenarnya seharusnya bisa sebanyak mungkin menggunakan renewable energy sources, new or renewable energy, dan energi bersih gitu ya, yang sekarang masih dibatasi oleh PLN sebagai perusahaan yang memonopoli distribusi dan penghasil listrik di Indonesia, penghasil energi di Indonesia. Jadi PLN sendiri masih dasarnya banyak menggunakan fossil fuel dan sedang bertransformasi juga gitu. Ini kalau kita bicara operational carbon, bagaimana dengan kemudian kita balancing emisi karbonnya, recover apa yang sudah kita kurangi dan kita offset, dan kemudian bagaimana embodied carbon juga jadi satu hal yang kita address gitu ya. Seperti kita sama-sama tahu bahwa bangunan efeknya banyak tadi yang saya sebut, menimbulkan menggunakan energi yang efeknya polusi, memproduksi lebih dari 30% CO2 gitu. Rata-rata ya, mungkin di Indonesia sendiri banyak sih bangunan yang mungkin lebih sedikit atau bahkan lebih besar gitu ya kalau bangunan industri, right? Belum efeknya ke air. Ini semua bagian dari total ekosistem industri konstruksi. Kalau kita bicara praktek, saya masuk ke bagian yang kedua, salah satunya dalam praktek kami yang sudah ada, kami tulis juga di buku kami Beyond Building. Ada 3 kualitas yang harus dicapai. Satu, kualitas fungsi, ya, kehandalan bangunan, ini dasar gitu ya, sangat-sangat mendasar. Kemudian kualitas visual dari desain gitu ya, artistik, ekspresif, dan juga keteraturan gitu ya, dan tentu harus fit in, masuk ke dalam satu tatanan kawasan perkotaan. Yang ketiga, kualitas lingkungan. Kualitas lingkungan itu tidak hanya alami gitu ya, tidak hanya fisik tapi juga non fisikal gitu. Ada aspek sosial, budaya, dan lain-lain. Dan ada juga aspek yang physical environment, climate, natural environment, dan lingkungan kita ya, lingkungan yang kita buat, built environment, lingkungan binaan. Kita mulai dari bagaimana ini pekerjaan yang dikerjakan bersama-sama dengan PSUD, Duta Citra Konsultan di Semarang, dan juga dengan dengan Unitri sebagai ahli heritage. Ada gedung lama yang kebetulan ada bencana kebakaran. Bagaimana sebenarnya kita menggunakan lagi gitu ya, bangunan yang sudah hampir hancur, tidak dibongkar sama sekali, tapi menggunakan struktur yang ada, diperkuat, diperbaiki, dibuat aman gitu ya, dengan tambahan jalur-jalur kabel supaya tidak terjadi korslet dan kebakaran lagi. Yang ternyata waktu itu banyak kritik dari arsitek, dari rekan-rekan ya, arsitek membuat buruk. Ternyata kalau diisi, karena ini adalah living heritage gitu ya, cagar budaya yang hidup, yang dipakai gitu, nggak seperti benda mati yang dilihat, tapi ini benar-benar ada fungsi, ada kegiatan, ada jiwanya gitu, yang kita coba kembalikan di situ gitu ya. Ini dalam keadaan kosong tapi begitu terisi semua dan beraktivitas, ini jadi living heritage dan di-appreciate juga. Dan kita tidak hanya bicara tentang satu gedung lamanya saja, tapi juga merevitalisasi kawasan termasuk ruang terbukanya. Itu salah satu bagaimana kita melakukan pendekatan dari satu gedung yang sudah ada tanpa jadi embodied karbonnya juga sedikit mungkin karena struktur dan lain-lain sudah berdiri, tinggal kita bagaimana memperkuat gitu. Dan poin yang kedua adalah sustainable product tadi yang dalam slide-slide awal tentang materialnya sendiri. Dari mana bahan baku yang kita pakai gitu ya? Apakah sudah efisien, sustainable, bagaimana proses produksinya, gitu. Dan kualitas materialnya, durability-nya. Jadi nggak hanya asal sayangnya di Indonesia ini masih banyak harga termurah. Harga termurah oke, tapi bagaimana kualitasnya, spesifikasinya itu yang sebenarnya sangat salah satu hal yang penting juga. Karena kita bicara tentang investment jangka panjang, efisiensi jangka panjang, dan kalau kita bicara circularity, sebisa mungkin apapun bisa dipakai lagi gitu ya. Sampai akhir umurnya di dismantle masih berguna lagi kalau kita bicara tentang LCA, life cycle assessment untuk satu material. Dan bagaimana sebisa mungkin produksinya dekat gitu ya, locally produced dan source gitu dihasilkan dari sini. Untuk ilustrasi aja ini satu material dari ratusan bahkan mungkin ribuan material dalam gedung, emisi CO2 dari 1 ton beton gitu ya, yang 14% dari beton tersebut adalah semen, adalah 400 kg per meter kubik. Jadi bayangkan satu gedung bisa berapa banyak. Nah, dalam menggunakan material gitu, material ini enamel ya sebagai tampak fasad bangunan, tentu tetap dia mengeluarkan emisi, masih ada embodied karbonnya, tapi bagaimana sebenarnya material tersebut dibuat di prefabrikasi, kemudian dirakit, di assembly di lahan gitu ya, material yang terbuka bernafas. Kemudian bagaimana kami menggunakan ini gedung kantor di kawasan industri yang begitu panas gitu di Cilegon, bagaimana satu material bisa jadi ini material eksterior, fasad, jadi material eksterior sekaligus material interior dengan tanpa mengorbankan estetika juga gitu. Jadi satu lapis begitu dipasang dia udah finish. Dari satu modul itu kita potong beberapa gitu ya, jadi ini, dan di komplement dengan material-material lain yang dimulai dari awal dari pemikiran desain. Kemudian kalau selama ini salah satu contoh saja, jadi memang secara praktek belum atau kita sedang belajar menuju itu. Ini contohnya batu alam yang orang-orang biasanya cari ukuran yang besar-besar karena lebih mewah. Nah, ini bagaimana sebenarnya menggunakan batu-batu yang bisa dibilang ya kalau sisa juga enggak, tapi ukuran-ukuran kecil gitu ya. Jadi sebanyak mungkin kalau ada yang tahu proses industri batu gitu ya. Jadi batu itu satu bongkah biasanya dia efisiensinya antara 50 sampai 80%, nggak pernah 100% dipakai karena ada yang cacat, ada yang memang bentuknya nggak bisa dipasang. Nah, ini sebisa mungkin satu batu dari satu sumber itu dipakai sebanyak-banyaknya, dan secara estetis ternyata nilainya secara estetis masih baik gitu. Bagaimana kita ini dari penelitian kami juga di kantor di PDW sekarang, material yang modular dan prefabrikasi. Kenapa prefabrikasi penting dalam circularity? Karena industri punya look-nya sendiri, konstruksi gedung punya look-nya sendiri. Sebanyak mungkin material yang dibawa ke site, ke construction, dibuat di pabrik, maka sampahnya pun akan dikelola di pabrik. Jadi misalnya di pabrik kaca bekasnya dia daur ulang sendiri gitu. Tapi kalau potongan kaca tersebut ada di konstruksi, motong aluminium, motong kaca, motong bata, itu akan jadi seringkali jadi landfill gitu ya. Karena kontraktor tidak punya KPI, tidak punya kemampuan, tidak punya target untuk mengelola sampah di lapangan, jadi akhirnya dibawa keluar gitu, dibawa keluar. Nah, kalau di pabrik mereka bisa dikelola sendiri. Terus hal yang kedua adalah modularity, di mana kita bekerja sama dengan produsen material untuk tahu modul-modul bahan bangunan mereka gitu ya. Karena aluminium misalnya ACP tidak selalu kelipatannya sama dengan kaca misalnya. Jadi bagaimana itu dari fasad misalnya, dari luar, tapi dari dalam juga sampai modul meja kerja, modul ceiling, langit-langit, sampai ke modul tempat parkir, gimana kita semua diperhitungkan untuk efisiensi penggunaannya, efisiensi aplikasinya di dalam proyek, dan sebisa mungkin modular, dan setiap setiap material tentu punya dimensi masing-masing. Ini salah satu proyek yang mengedepankan energy efficiency dan social sustainability menggunakan vertical element untuk fasad bangunan. Kemudian kita juga harus belajar dari natural dan locally sourced material. Ini ada di Aula Barat ITB yang menggunakan teknologi terdepan waktu itu, laminated timber yang jadi struktur sekaligus jadi finishing di dalam bangunan. Waktu 2018 ada gempa besar di Lombok, kami belajar, kami lihat, kami diminta tolong untuk salah satu pesantren untuk mendirikan satu bangunan masjid. Kita lihat bangunan di sana yang utuh ternyata bangunan yang satu materialnya lokal, kemudian kedua materialnya juga dibangun jadi bukan menggunakan bahan-bahan modern gitu ya. Kita kemudian kami mendesain satu masjid yang dengan kapasitas 600 sampai 1000 orang, 2 lantai. Tidak hanya materialnya di source, sumbernya dari lokal, tapi juga tenaga kerjanya. Jadi ketukangannya menggunakan kayu kelapa yang sudah berumur, sudah mau habis ya, dan mudah ditanam. Dari mulai tertutup atapnya sampai bangunannya selesai bisa digunakan, dan alhamdulillah waktu terjadi beberapa kali gempa susulan karena memang di Ring of Fire, di jaringan gunung berapi, bangunannya tetap tidak ada kerusakan sama sekali gitu ya, dan sudah jadi. Yang terakhir, proyek terakhir yang kami kerjakan di Sukabumi merupakan satu fasilitas resort, cafe gitu ya, gimana kita menghubungkan antara manusia, arsitektur dan alam, membuat satu semacam saung gitu, semacam cafe semi terbuka, yang tantangannya waktu itu menggunakan material dari bambu. Jadi kita bikin kami bikin maketnya, kemudian semua aspek dari bangunan tersebut sebanyak mungkin di source dari material lokal, masih memakai beberapa ini semen juga, terus ada sambungan-sambungan baja untuk menyambungkan antara struktur bambunya. Kemudian ya ini dibuat modelingnya dari dengan 3D printer, mock-up sampai diterapkan di lapangan dengan bentuk atap yang tidak biasa gitu ya, ada beberapa lipatan gitu ya, jadi seperti origami yang di tiap sudut-sudutnya lipatan tersebut menampung air sebenarnya. Kemudian untuk bikin dindingnya kami pakai bata ringan yang dibentuk, jadi dibentuk hampir tidak ada sampah, dia tidak disusun biasa tapi disusun supaya memasukkan penghawaan dan pencahayaan alami. Sampai wastafelnya pun kita desain, kami desain supaya bisa memurnikan air kotor yang ada, yang sebagai water purifier sekaligus. Jadi air yang kebuang atau diserap kembali ke dalam tanah, dan bangunan ini sudah mulai beroperasi di kawasan Sukabumi. Baik, terima kasih atas perhatiannya. Saya kembalikan ke Bu Ade sebagai moderator.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thank you so very much, Bapak Tio. Yeah. So I will try to conclude a little bit in English because there are two speakers who speaks in English. So basically, Pak Tio has been trying to explain that everything needs to be well and thoroughly researched, particularly on implementing in buildings or even in the public buildings, for example. So not only about the the material that will be used, but also the many kind of aspect, the modularity, Azim. Sorry, let me start again. I've been muted, I guess. So I try to conclude a little bit in a very concise way of what Pak Tio has been presenting. So Pak Tio explained about that everything need to be researched thoroughly, not only about choosing the material, but also how the modularity, for example, play a lot in the controlling the waste management of the of building the public building, for example, as well as the how to optimize the waste management of the material itself. So these are very much a good some good example on how we try to reduce, reuse, and maximize on building the architecture that pretty much respect green architecture, sustainability, as well as a low carbon emission, for example. So now we're moving on to the last speaker, Mr. Troels Damatsen. Yeah, I hope I spell it correctly.
No, it's fine.
Okay. Please welcome the fourth speaker. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me. Otherwise, please shout out. So I would like just to start with a little disclaimer that the Indonesian market is not my sort of topmost competence. So I think I'll give you a little insight on a more Nordic and a specifically Danish perspective of what's going on these days in our part of the world. So for the last 10 years, you could say we have gradually moving towards changing our behavior on making new buildings. It's obviously coming from a knowledge that we didn't have before. So you can say this diagram very much visualizes the sort of do's and don'ts that we are looking into on materials, the same way that all Danish children for years have been educated on what to eat and what not to eat. So the pyramid on the right-hand side is actually an outcome of one of the earliest research projects our in-house PhD has made here in the office. So to at broad try to communicate where is the embodied carbon and thereby the CO2 emissions coming from on materials. Of course, it's also a very, very superficial calculation because there's many layers and truths inside all materials, but just to sort of start up this new learning, this has been a very powerful tool. And the next diagram is obviously already been highlighted for the last 3%, so I won't sort of dive more into that, but obviously the more you can prevent before you actually have to recycle and reuse is the obvious choice. So again, just to give you a little perspective on the state of things in Denmark, you could say if you look at the whole waste numbers for the whole country, The tendency curves for recycling waste is going up, and this is for household waste. And the tendency for burning and putting waste to depot is declining. So that's good news. The bad news is that we still continue to make more accumulated, totally absolute numbers waste year for year. And you can say the three categories is sort of evenly distributed between construction waste, waste from households, and then other industries. And I don't know the statistics in Indonesia, but then the standards, that's an average of waste per person of 3,000 kilos per year, everything included. So it's a vast amount of waste. So again, between household waste, as we saw before, the tendency is going up towards more recycling. But when you look at the specific numbers for construction industry, from instinctively, it seems that we have a high degree of recyclability in construction waste. But when you look more closely into the numbers, a lot of it is, in my terminology, being downcycling. That means that, for instance, concrete and brick is being crushed and used for build-ups and roads. So that's sort of a declining of quality, like I think also Björn touched upon before. And another thing of concern is that the ratio of to what degree we recycle is flat. So there's not any improvement over the last 5-6 years. So that's something to take care of. So again, a very high number that is really hard to comprehend is that we have 1.1 billion tons of construction waste globally every year. And how, I mean, these big numbers is something that to me, it is being very mind-boggling. Sort of, what does it mean? It's hard to relate to. So I tried to make some diagrams that make it more relatable. So 1 year of construction waste globally, it would be the same as building 450 pyramids of Giza on the whole area of Manhattan. So the outline shape here is the Manhattan all the way from the northern part all the way down to the tip. And again, just to put more perspective on the materiality sort of at new production, if you take 10 Manhattans with 450 Giza pyramids massively filled with new concrete, that's the amount of concrete that the world consumes every year. So it's kind of it's underlining the enormous efforts we all have to do to bring those numbers down and to sort of use less, essentially. In Denmark, we are being, you can say, forced to lower our emissions on upfront carbon on a yearly basis, starting from next year and down to 2030. But the interesting part here, you can see it's in Danish, sorry for that, but you can see the numbers here. So it's 12 kilos, 10.5, 9, 7.5, and then down to up at some point 0, of course. But the interesting part in Denmark is that the driver for right now for bringing down even further the emissions is coming from the pension funds and the big investment companies. So they're setting their limits much lower than these limits. And the sort of mechanisms that we see behind that is that they obviously heavily rely on investments in the stock market. And they want to chase those sort of green investments that most pension funds require, of having 5 to 10% of their portfolio on green investments. So the people that build housing, especially in Denmark, they are keen to be the best in class. So that's why they're low. So currently we have an ongoing project here in Copenhagen, where we are down to 4 kilos of CO2 per square meter. It's obviously a wooden construction and a lot of low carbon materials associated to that. So it's an interesting phenomenon where the regulations from the government has been the driver for all building, but that's a big shift happening now. So the industry is actually the pusher for it, especially the investing party. So the rest of my presentation is on very hands-on pragmatic proposals that we have done and is doing right now on how to lower the specific uses of material and use recycled material. So a big, for those of you who have seen or been in Denmark, you know that it's a brick country. We have, the whole country is built on clay. So clay is everywhere and it's easy to access. And bricks are by far the most used material. So the only downside with brick is that it takes a lot of energy to make a brick in the burning process. So just for comparison, we can say that it's around 260 kilos of CO2 per ton of a brick wall, but a used brick wall is only 3 kilos. So obviously there's a huge potential in going for the used bricks. The problem with the used brick is that and that I assume is the same in Indonesia, that after 1960, it turned from being a chalk-based mortar to a cement-based mortar, which essentially means that the bricks after that period, it cannot be disassembled without damaging the brick, which is something you obviously didn't think about in the 1960s, that you had to dismantle it. But all the brick before that period is very easy to take out and reuse. And that's what we specifically did for a big school, public school in the second largest city in Denmark. So a nearby hospital was up for demolition and repurposing, and all the bricks from that project was used to recreate this new school. So that's 400,000 bricks that was directly reused, and thereby contributing to a lower CO2 emissions. And another theme of bricks in Denmark is obviously roof tiles. I saw some of your previous images, so it seems like it's a similar thing in Jakarta and in Indonesia. So there's a lot of brick roofs in Denmark, and the brick is often having a much longer lifespan than the building itself. And an example of that is a project for a housing agency in the third largest city in Denmark, where those houses have to be demolished because of mold problems. So they were constructed very poorly, but the actual roof tiles are doing really great. So we are doing testing now in a Danish Technological Institute, and it's pretty mind-boggling. They have estimated between 80 and 120 years of remaining lifetime in these bricks. So we have a specific project for the same client that is demolishing these houses, and therefore we suggested them to use all this roof tiles as the new facade material. So this is the sort of render of the future project to be, but we sort of focused on bringing in the aesthetic qualities of this recycled brick, combined with some new materials being anodized aluminium. So there's a lot of sort of new ways of designing. And if I just go back to the previous slide, the whole work of getting, let's say, from knowing that these bricks were here to the testing and to the real project has been a huge time-consuming process, because you have to align from the whole value chain, from the client, the insurance company, the testing facility, and the contractor, and who's responsible for that. So it's just to say, we're learning from this every time, but it's a big challenge, and it takes a lot of time and effort to actually succeed. It's much easier to go and buy a virgin product, but we are fighting for it. So now moving on to wood and some examples for that. We have a recently completed office building here in Copenhagen, where we have tried to sort of say how much can we introduce upcycling or recycling. I just took this picture from inside the building. So a lot of the furniture and all the sort of pendants and the lights is coming from the old premises where the client was sitting before. So traditionally you just take all out, but here we try to keep as much as possible. And on a specific note, all the interior partition walls and glass walls is made from small pieces of waste wood profiles. So this waste wood is something that the normal wood production is using for making furniture and making other sort of floor elements, but there's always some small elements that is left. So we actually made a design out of putting all these little pieces of wood together, and that is actually all the wooden partition walls and doors, and what you see in this picture is coming and is made by this process. Another very specific project is just this summer concluded. Fritz Hansen is a big furniture producer here in Denmark, and they wanted to stage their 150 years anniversary as a furniture producer. So they made this 3 days of design event in the middle center of Copenhagen in a museum garden, where we designed and built this pavilion for them. But the overall message was sort of make no waste. So we were very keen on demonstrating this design for disassembly theme, where essentially you erect a whole pavilion, is 250 square meters, using standard wood profiles, standard brackets for steel, standard everything is untouched, you can say, and then we have some polycarbonate infill that is also not cut to size. So everything is sort of possible to take apart to its audience. So what is happening now is it's being dismantled here, and now it will have some more years of afterlife out where, for instance, headquarters is in their garden, serving as workshops, and then onwards from that, it can be, if there's no more need for it there, dismantled down to its initial parts. So that's kind of a hands-on learning process on how to sort of set yourself the goal that you want everything to be reusable. And that has also to do with keeping a certain simplicity and rhythm and repetition in the profiles and the use of them. Another example of wood is a school that is underway in Trondheim in Norway, where there was an existing building that has to go down. And a lot of that was made by these glulam beams. So there was a small exercise on actually recycling all those as the floors for the new building. So essentially, you can see here the glulam beam is being cut into length of wood here. And this is essentially going to be laid down as the final floor for the whole new school. So it's also very hands-on, just to keep the material on the premises. So we have another ongoing research project, which is to do with upcycling waste wood from construction industry to CLST elements, so CLT elements essentially, but with secondary timber. And Colin Rose, who's the sort of man behind this study, he's done research to see that this is based from the UK, that almost like 500,000 tons of solid wood is wasted in the construction industry every year. So there's a huge potential. I think he estimates up to 10,000 houses could be built just from the recycled houses. So they're doing testing, and the learning so far has been that the need for testing, because it's not a virgin new material that you can give guarantees, you need to test all elements, but they have developed acoustic measurements. So it's a very speedy process to verify every single piece of wood that is still performing structurally. So they have good results on that. But again, the main driver here is the testing, and it's also the time spent for collecting the wood and sort of putting it back together. Then I have a project that is also underway. It's a small demonstration pavilion for how far have we gone on sort of using concrete. So there's a lot of partner involved and produce of concrete, and also the testing facilities. And we sort of have, sorry? There's a little echo somewhere. Okay, but yeah, so we're demonstrating a double curved in situ cast shell where we'll have only 80 millimeters thick concrete to sort of put the pressure from the shell out to a ring beam. Then we have a direct recycling theme, also as an image of it later, where we're taking existing paving stones from the courtyards of Danish houses and giving them a new life. Then we're demonstrating how to 3D print hollow columns, custom hollow columns I'll show you pictures of that. And then Terrains Lab will see how far we can go in using 100% recycled concrete aggregates instead of virgin material. All of it is used there's a product name called Future Sem, which is containing more calcinated clay than calcinated chalk here in Denmark. So it's a step on the way for using less carbon footprint for the cement, but it's nowhere near in the goal yet. So it's just a state of things. So just some more reference images for that. So the hollow columns that we print will be the same amount of material as the reference here is a normal sized small core wall that you would do outside of a staircase or something like that. So we're just trying to make the most of the material use by actually using the technology for 3D printing the hollow column elements. And here's some first generation test of that. And most of you have probably seen 3D printing before, so it looks much more coarse. And the reason for that is that we're printing with actual concrete and not mortar. When you print with mortar, you're using a higher degree of cement, and that's what we want to avoid. So the CO2 footprint per cubic meter, I think you saw a figure before in the previous presentation, of around 400, which is the industry standard. These columns are down to 200. So it's essentially half of that footprint. So it also comes as that the challenge is to the manufacturer with there's a lot of fly ash as well in the mix to bring down the overall CO2 emissions. And here's an image of how it will look in the end, hopefully. And here's an image from the interior, so it's not so much on the architecture. And here's the impression of the upcycled brick pavers. So the last three topics, or the topic that is that I just want to highlight is that what we see very much happening in the industry is that a lot of new platforms for facilitating the accessibility of used materials is popping up, and they are constantly improving. So there's one web platform called Genbyg in Denmark, which means rebuild, where you can go in and search for what kind of material you're looking for. So this is it's a big warehouse essentially that holds all this recycled material. The challenge here is that the amounts of material we actually want to have is very hard to find. So for smaller projects, it's fine. For larger scale production, it's really difficult. So that's a challenge. But recently, this person behind this has been acquired by one of the big construction companies. So their mission is absolutely to scale the amounts up. So that's really positive news. Another good initiative that's happening here is a project called Gentræ. It means rewood, directly translated. And their concept is to deliver these URNs out to the building sites where the waste construction wood, you just put it directly and then they pick it up again and then they process it. So they sort of made a whole value chain of offering a cheaper solution totally for the contractors to put their reclaimed wood and then they pick it up. So there's a good business case there as well, and that is also being scaled in Denmark right now. The last initiative I just want to put some attention to is a Norwegian platform called Rehab. It's essentially a more advanced platform than the previous one I showed you. Here you also get advice on how much CO2 you can save. You get more legal advice on when you use reclaimed materials, how would then the legal stuff of who's responsible for this and that come out in the end. So there's a lot of potential here. The platform right now is not, there's only a few example projects, but the perspective behind it I find very, very interesting. So I think that was actually it from I don't know if I was too fast, but then that leaves a little more room for questions.
Thank you, Trolls. So it's a very perfect timing. So I'll try to make a conclusion in Indonesia, so then some people will understand that. Kita bisa lihat ya bahwa perbedaan dari speaker sebelumnya Pak Tio yang mempelajari betul dari mulai modularnya material, kemudian aspeknya terhadap bangunan besar dan sebagainya, itu yang sangat diperhatikan, tapi kebanyakan skala bangunannya memang besar, bangunan publik dan sebagainya, repetisinya juga besar, sementara contoh-contoh kasus dari Trolls itu kebanyakan dalam intimate scale ya, skala yang lebih kecil, memakai bangunan yang betul-betul, memakai material yang betul-betul dari daur ulang, dihitung betul keterbatasannya, terus di-research betul bagaimana mengantisipasinya, dan bahkan direproduksi ulang dengan standar-standar keamanan dan keselamatan yang terbaru, padahal pakai material yang lama dan sebagainya. Jadi upaya untuk reuse itu ternyata sangat-sangat diupayakan dan sangat partikular untuk per project, artinya tidak bisa direpetisi pada proyek yang lain. Itu beda yang sangat signifikan antara speaker 3 dan speaker 4 yang kita bisa belajar banyak ya. Masih banyak lagi poin-poin yang menarik dari Bapak Trolls, tapi kira-kira yang satu yang menarik di kacamata saya adalah itu. So I need to tell everybody that supposedly we thought to have a Mentimeter to have some reflection from the audience, but unfortunately the time is very restricted. So we're gonna moving on to the Q&A section. So yeah, so I'm gonna try to read some of the question, and then there's a line over here in the slides that the first question is dedicated to Bjorn. So as it shows in the slides, I'm gonna read it. Okay, I'm gonna read it in English because you're speaking English. What is the real action by designing and planning for circular cities to tackle global issues using recycled materials such as plastic, metal, and glass to the development of implementation, I guess. And then the second one would be ways to transition towards circular economy. What is the ways to transition towards circular economy? Maybe you have some idea. So Bjorn, would you like to answer these questions?
Yes, for the first one, I think some of the solutions that has been shown by the previous presentations as well, and of course, I usually say that circular economy is basically the inner city warfare of sustainability. It's fighting from building to building, from house to house, and from street to street. It's about finding solutions that works for multiple usages, for multiple materials. So it's very much about doing the research, doing the testing, checking out that it's actually something that is sustainable, but also that also has been said by others here as well. Doing LCA analysis, test materials, bring them further forward, and show by cases and demonstration that it can be done. I think that's one part of it. The other part, of course, is very obvious, is that if you're going to design and planning for cities where you use recycled materials, you need to capture those materials. It's about having regulations. It's about having systems that take care of the materials when you tear buildings down, when you have materials coming out of the systems, not bringing them to dump sites or landfills, but bringing them back into the system. Having the economic system that brings things back, and in between those two, there is the need. Tools showed there is an enormous amount of both waste and new materials being handled every year, and handling those materials and bringing them from one place to another in a system also calls for place. It calls for square meters. So there's also a need to plan for the depots of material coming from demolition projects in an orderly way, but also have that kind of pool and storage where you can keep those materials before you have a usage from somewhere else. In an ideal world, of course, you should be able to plan for demolishing something and building something new at the same time, but there will always be transaction times, and there will be waiting times, and therefore you also need those pools to be able to do it. So I think it's very important to have a well-functioning recycling system, demands on the ones that are tearing buildings down or wasting materials to deliver them in a proper place, having places to keep those materials, and then having a building and construction and designing sector that finds the new solutions for those materials that are out there. Material passes and more information on what kind of materials are there in the building mass, what is in the build, what is in the built environment at the moment material-wise is also important to be able to plan for what can you get out of recycled materials. So I think that would be my bid on how to do this in practice. But also once again saying recycling is good, but reducing material usage in the first place is even better. Reusing and making sure that materials are used again and that buildings are used again is even better. When it comes to transition toward a circular economy, it's a broad package. It's a societal package of things that has to be done. First of all, it's about education and knowledge. It's about teaching why is it important, what is the consequences of living and acting like we do today, and what can be done to change that. And where it's also very important on an individual level to inform and teach people on what can they do in their daily life, because it's on the end of the day it breaks down to all of us have to do something, and if we're going to do that, we need to know how we can do it. We'll have to have the means to do it. So information is very important. Regulation is important. Regulation and enforcement that makes the systems work is very important. Applying the right financial instruments that brings the investments needed and also steers our behavior is very important to make sure that we are going in the right way. And on top of that, of course, as I also mentioned briefly in my presentation, it is very important that we think and design our built environment, our buildings, our cities, our infrastructure in a way that supports new ways of doing things. The circular economy provides another urban metabolism than the linear economy, and our built environment has to be constructed in a way that supports that. And that's in many cases is about making material transactions from user to user rather from user to waste. So it's an ability to bring something back within the city, bring it to deliver things back. It's about being able to wash your reusable plates rather than having to throw plastic plates out. It's about being able to borrow a book or rent a tuxedo when you need it. It's about having the deposit systems that make it possible for you to bring back your plastic containers for refilling instead of having plastic bottles that goes to incineration or at best case recycling. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Bjorn. So let me speak in bahasa. So memang semuanya harus didefinisikan ulang bagaimana cara hidup kita untuk melakukan sesuatu, merencanakan sesuatu, membangun bangunan atau merencanakan kota. Tapi satu hal yang disebutkan oleh Bapak Bjorn adalah kita harus benar-benar men-trace bagaimana sebuah bangunan yang kemudian melahirkan waste yang semua terdokumentasi sehingga bisa diupayakan supaya bisa di-reduce atau di-recycle berikutnya. Kira-kira mungkin gitu, masih banyak jawaban tadi dari Pak Bjorn, tapi kita kembali, kita akan beralih, we're moving on to the question 2. Yeah, this is from Ria to Mr. Prasetyo Adi. Terkait circularity, apakah construction waste management sudah diatur dalam green building? So regarding the circularity, is there any way that construction of the waste management has been controlled or regulated in the green building? So Pak Tio, silakan.
Terima kasih pertanyaannya rekan Ria. Ya jawabannya singkat sudah. Jadi dalam apa namanya di rating system itu sebenarnya sebagai alat komunikasi dari Green Building Council untuk bagaimana industri bisa bertransformasi, ada di kategori tentang apa namanya tentang manajemen baik dalam masa konstruksi maupun nanti pengoperasiannya. Sampah proyek harus didaur ulang atau dipakai kembali atau dikembalikan ke pabrik untuk didaur ulang. Kemudian ada juga kriteria untuk kerjasama dengan pihak ketiga yang bisa mendaur ulang sampah konstruksi. Terima kasih.
So yeah, thank you, Tio. So basically, yes, it has been included in the green building through rating system and then some criteria. So let's move on to question 3. This is from Yamlik Azikin to all speakers. So those who relate with the question, please answer this question. How to address the challenges on producing the environmentally friendly and durable materials? So what are the challenges and then how to address them? Who's going to start? Anyone from the 4 speakers? Maybe Trolls or Pak Iwan?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very big and open question, of course, and it's very complex to answer. I think it's for the production of environmental friendly. When you talk about new production, obviously we are chasing, like from my presentation, the one in the lower part, which is the lowest embodied carbon possible. So that's for sort of the whole normal, you can say, from virgin materials, the value chain there. I think all producers are chasing to be as low as they can, and they have, I believe all big material producers have roadmaps to reach zero in 2050, obviously, and some are able to get there earlier than others, depending on what kind of material we're talking about, it being glass, concrete, plastics, etc. So I think the challenge is mostly on, if we talk then specifically about recycled materials and the circularity of it, the more sort of directly you use a product and sort of have to give it a new generation of use, and especially when it's used in something where there's issue on fire and sort of personal safety and static structures and whatnot, that's the biggest challenge I see so far. And I think we can only highlight it, and we can, as I also showed, for example, try to do and walk the extra mile it takes right now to go through all the testing and all the legal stuff, and it's a very time-consuming process. But over time, I trust that there will be some more sort of agreed on methods for dealing with specific project chains and the recyclability of them. And I think a web page like the one I highlighted in the end called ReHub, there will be a new sort of contributor to the choosing of materials where they will facilitate this process. So it's not from scratch every time. So I trust and hope that market of people assisting in taking and materials and directly reusing will be a much more scaled phenomena here, and we see that already happening. So I trust that will be globally also so.
Right. Yeah, agree. Yeah. So even though this is for all speakers, but I believe I can narrow down the those who can answer this. It relates pretty much with Pak Tio. Probably Pak Tio can answer this also.
So the most sustainable material is actually that the shorter process. For example, for cement, for concrete, that it has to be taken from the mining and it mixed in the and using a lot of energy. Same with steel, that they have to take from the mining site, go to in Indonesia in Cilegon, and mix with other material using a lot of energy and become steel. Maybe as a material, as a nail, as a nut and bolt, it's so cheaply, but what's most sustainable material is actually the material that's processed very short. So bamboo is one, another wooden material, but you have to consider replanting or even more planting. We are doing a development concept for
village in Kalimantan doing these principles. Yeah, I didn't show you this time, but the challenge is how you build, you know, the if you build a high density building, for example, or high rise, things like that. That will be a challenge using sustainable material. So that's how you get a sustainable material efficiently and for the durability. Of course, you have to see the material property, the specification itself. The fourth speaker shown how they use the one of the material that is sustainable and also should be not expensive, or if we cannot say cheap, is the recycled material. Actually, maybe hopefully it's help answering the question.
Yeah, that is the challenge that sometimes people forget that in terms of using a very good material, and then they forgot how to acquire that material. The material sometimes are located pretty much far away from the location, and then costs a lot in the transportation, for example. That's not pretty much environmentally friendly. So that's sometimes the thing that forgotten for this designer.
Can I make just a brief comment on this one
Sure,
as well?
sure, please.
Sure,
please.
sure. I'll try to. I think one of the most important things is to create demand for products. It can be done in many ways. It can be by education, but it's very much about financing instruments or banning some things as well. But it's bringing in a financial demand, a market demand, also is what brings innovation and development forward. So it's getting that demand. If it's a tax on virgin materials, or it's a carbon tax, or whatever it is, there is a lot of instruments that can be used. I think that's very important. And then, of course, it's also very important to remember that there are different ways to make something sustainable, depending on how it's going to be used. If it's going to be used for a very short time, recyclability and recoverability will be very important. If you're going to have a very long durability of something, recyclability is not that important, because then you have a long lifetime instead. So it's considering what are things going to be used to, and what does sustainability mean in the usage phase.
Right. Yeah.
Ya, mungkin saya menambahkan Mbak Ade.
Yep.
Ya, jadi
Silakan,
dari aspek pemerintah ya, di sini memang Pemprov tidak memproduksi ya bahan-bahan ramah lingkungan, tetapi bagaimana ketika membentuk atau menciptakan ruang-ruang publik itu menggunakan bahan-bahan yang berkualitas, ya, material-material yang berkualitas sehingga mempunyai daya tahan lama ketika dimanfaatkan untuk fungsi publik, khususnya yang outdoor gitu, sehingga daya tahan lama itulah yang tadi juga mengurangi ya penggantian material yang sangat singkat gitu. Nah, itu tentunya juga tahan lama dalam hal material yang berkualitas tentunya juga menjadi salah satu poin penting bagaimana ruang-ruang publik yang sudah diciptakan dan juga yang sudah dimanfaatkan tersebut juga bisa lebih aman ya, tidak hanya estetik ya, tetapi juga memperhatikan dari aspek lingkungan ya, sehingga tidak ada material-material yang memang akan dibuang, akan digunakan atau menggunakan material yang berulang untuk memperbaikinya seperti itu.
Baik, Pak. Yeah, so Mr. Iwan added some points that in terms of the recreating public space and public building. So it is important to have the very good materials with a high quality that has a very long durability, because sometimes we tend to forget to use a very high quality material in the public building regarding to the requirement of the maintenance, for example. So it is important to not only having the aesthetic issue on the public building, but how to limit the maintenance fee, the maintenance management, the maintenance of the building. It is important for not having material that will be wasted along the maintenance progress, for example. So yeah, that's the thing that Pak Iwan added into the discussion. So we still have time. Is it? Yes, we still have time for the next question. So the fourth one from Adi Tungkadi Raya. This is for Pak Iwan again. Tantangan apa saja yang dapat dirasakan dalam proses menciptakan dan menerapkan kota sirkular, terutama dalam meminimalisir limbah dari peningkatan penduduk yang pesat, serta sistem produksi dan kehidupan di suatu kota. So this question is about what are the challenges that relate with the process of implementing the circular city throughout Indonesia, particularly in on how to minimize the waste management resulted from the increase of the population, and as well as the production system and the living culture in the city. So, Pak Iwan, can you answer this question? Thank you.
Baik, ini saya ngambil beberapa contoh kasus ya. Jadi selama ini ya masyarakat di kawasan perkampungan padat penduduk ya, itu banyak yang pembangunan instalasi septic tank-nya, IPAL-nya itu banyak yang tidak memenuhi kualifikasi atau standarisasi sistem IPAL atau septic tank yang baik, sehingga dapat dikatakan bahwa kualitas air tanah yang di Jakarta ini mempunyai kandungan bakteri E. coli yang sangat tinggi ya. Yang melebihi batas baku mutu yang diperkenankan, sehingga pembangunan IPAL komunal ya itu merupakan satu bagian upaya Pemprov untuk juga memberikan kesehatan bagi lingkungan ya. Ketika ada lingkungan yang memang sudah tercemar ya, itu yang dihasilkan dari kegiatan rumah tinggal itu bagaimana kita Pemprov adanya satu upaya untuk perbaikan. Nah, sudah banyak dilakukan ya upaya pembangunan limbah komunal ya dalam rangka juga untuk memberikan lingkungan yang sehat bagi masyarakat dan juga air yang juga menjadi lebih baik. Nah, memang ini merupakan tantangan kita semuanya ya, baik itu pemerintah, pelaku usaha dan masyarakat ya, terkait dengan limbah ini ya, itu tidak diharapkan memang tidak menjadi hal yang urusan pemerintah semata ya, tetapi bagaimana limbah ini pun juga sudah dikelola lebih baik ya oleh pelaku usaha. Misalnya tadi dengan penerapan IPAL yang baik yang bisa ada daur ulang dari penggunaan air. Nah, tentunya juga bisa mereduksi penggunaan air tanah dan juga air-air yang bisa menghemat di dalam penggunaan air di dalam satu aktivitas kegiatan usaha seperti itu. Nah, berbicara limbah yang memang ini merupakan satu hal yang tidak bisa hanya urusan pemerintah ya. Ini pun juga mesti ada kesadaran dari masyarakat itu sendiri bagaimana mereka juga sudah melakukan aktivitasnya itu tidak membuang sampah sembarangan, kemudian juga sistem yang terkoneksi dengan sistem yang baik seperti itu. Nah, memang ini merupakan tantangan bagi kota-kota yang sudah tumbuh dan sudah padat ya seperti Jakarta. Nah, tapi langkah untuk upaya perbaikan ini bukan berarti itu akan menjadi diabaikan, tetapi bagaimana upaya-upaya penanganan limbah ini ya, edukasi, kemudian perbaikan septic tank, kemudian sistem IPAL-nya itu sudah terus dilakukan tidak hanya oleh pemerintah tetapi juga dari badan-badan usaha di bawah Pemprov dengan PDPAL-nya seperti itu, Mbak Tinami. Menjawab apa yang ditanyakan oleh Pak Adi Tungka di Raja.
Terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much, Pak Iwan. So basically, Pak Iwan explain about the situation. Can we still in this question 4? So the situation in the high density living in a very high living situation. So one of the challenge for sure is about the wastewater treatment hub that's supposedly based on the communal assessment. But again, there are a lot of challenges that cannot be done or still in the ongoing process. Pak Iwan also encouraged that this wastewater treatment hub is not necessarily becoming the homework of the government, but also needs to be done in a community level, as well as the private sector also need to be included in the in improving the system. So yeah, let's move on to the next question, question 5 from Herman Huta Suhut. It's dedicated to trolls. How much the cost differences between conventional building and low emission building? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you take sort of the building where we're designing currently, where everything is low emissions, so that's wooden construction, and everything is materials that are sourced for being low carbon. There we expect a cost premium of 20 to 30% over a reference building. But on a more specific material level, you could say that the example I showed on the roof tiles there it's a very competitive price. I mean, the price per square meter is around 100 Danish kroner. I'm sorry, I don't know what the direct currency is to your currency, but it's in euro. It's around 12 euros per square meter, and that's like a third of the price of a virgin material of comparable thing. But on the other side, you have the school I showed where you have the recycled brick. Those brick used to be fairly competitive, like again down to maybe 0.7 euros per stone. Nowadays they are upwards 2.5 euros per stone, and that's actually, you could say, it's been conquered by its own success. So there's such a high demand for these recycled bricks, and the availability is not so great. So therefore, that one is becoming economically much more unattractive, which is a problem, obviously, because everybody wants to use this recycled brick. So that's just to highlight the spectrum is very difficult to sort of say something very specific about. So some materials will be much cheaper, some are very much more expensive. And of course, the handling of the recycled material is a big factor. So we have another, I didn't include that example today, but we have another house where we wanted to reuse all the existing pavement. There was a lot of high quality granite pavers used on an existing plot that we want to use to bring to a new plot. The handling came out 2.5 times more expensive than buying new virgin granite from China. So then you really have to have a client that is eager to not contribute to bringing no more virgin material, because the cost was so high, premium. Because of the handling, it had to be taken to a depot, being there for 1 year, being cleaned manually by hand, and labor is super expensive here in Denmark, and then put in place. So again, there's really good and bad examples of, but it all points towards the handling and storage is a big factor, and that's why these platforms that do this more professional and have larger batches is definitely a big answer on that one. So I hope that clarifies a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
I know that in fact it's very difficult to really calculate because there are many factors, as you mentioned, like the handling and everything. But if we separate the handling aspect and then we say make a rough estimation, how do you make a rough estimation between, say in percentage, for example, between conventional building and low emission building? Which one, how many percentage that is lower or higher say 20% or 50%, or can you make a guess for that?
Yeah, but then that's the first example is that the total house we're making now out of it will be a wooden construction, and it will have instead of gypsum boards, it will have clay boards, and there's a lot of sort of exchanges for lower emission products, but they cost premium. I mean, a lot of these materials are also new on the market, so there's a smaller availability, which means that they are just pricier for them to produce, and thereby they are more costly to acquire for us. So, but all in all, it is the 20-30% margin that we're looking into for that specific product, and that's the client here is NREP. It's the biggest real estate developer in Denmark by far. So they know what they can pay and want to pay, but it's an interesting case for us. I didn't include it here because we are focusing very much on circularity and reuse of material, but that case is for us one of the ones that will break through the barrier of demonstrating that this can also be competitive. So of course it will be a cost premium in the first generations, but for sure this will decline once the production is going up on these more alternative materials.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the calculation will be different from one case to another case. I guess we cannot make a very generic estimation. Yeah, thank you so much. So do we have still time, or that will be it for the committee? Yeah, I guess we're hitting the limit. So I need to close this session, and then I will be moving this floor back to the MC. Thank you very much for all speakers. It is very nice to meet you all. And then I hope we still have another engagement to explore the issues next time. Thank you so much. So I'm giving the floor back to the MC. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Ade, and all of our speakers today, Mr. Bjorn, Mr. Iwan, Mr. Prasetyo, and Mr. Strauss. It was a very insightful session and presentation along with the Q&A session. And we got to learn more about circular cities in the whole package, from the introductory until the implementation in different scales, from building materials, building designing, planning, until the implementations in some cities that have been done in DKI Jakarta. Now, before we end the event, let's all take a photo together. And I would like to invite you all to turn on your camera. Ya, kepada Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, silakan untuk menyalakan kameranya karena kita akan berfoto bersama. Apakah sudah bisa berfoto? Oke, baik. Kita mulai di halaman pertama. 1, 2, 3. Kemudian ke halaman berikutnya, the second page. 1, 2, 3. And the next one, the third page. 1, 2, 3. Is there more? Sorry. Yeah, for the fourth page, the next page. Oh, okay, it's done. Okay, thank you very much. Terima kasih banyak Bapak Ibu sekalian. Silakan menutup kamera kembali. Jika berkenan dinyalakan juga dipersilakan. Yeah, and I also would like to recall our memories on the previous event for this emission series. Started with the first emission 1. Yeah, like Miss Ade mentioned before, that we had the first emission with the title Sustainable Mobility for Future Indonesian Cities. It was held in August online with our partner from MITJ as one of the speakers. And we also had our second event in this emission series. Please, the next slide, please. Yeah, this is still from the first event. And yeah, the second event we held it offline in Bandung with our partner as a speaker from Kementerian Pekerjaan Umum dan Perumahan Rakyat, Ibu Diani Rawati. Thank you very much to all of our speakers from the first session, the second session, and until the third session today. Yeah, and lastly, to officially end the emission series with today as the last event, I would like to say thank you very much to Ramboll to collaborating with us PSUD in producing talk show events. Hopefully, we can produce this kind of events later on in the future. And last but not least, also, I would like to thank you all, the participants, for joining us today. Please look forward to our next sessions of talks and events. Thank you and see you. Goodbye.
Thank you all. Thank you, the speakers. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.